The order had been in my saddlebag for 11 days. I had carried it across the Greyveld passes without unfolding it once, which was unlike me. I am not a man who delays what must be done. The Valdenmere territory had been in dispute for 3 seasons, a ridge-hold pack with no formal alpha, no bonded Luna, no council-recognized leadership structure, and the dissolution order was the council's solution, drafted and sealed and handed to me on a gray Tuesday morning as though it were nothing more complicated than a trade agreement. Assess the territory. If the pack cannot demonstrate stability and a clear line of authority, issue the order. Return within the fortnight. I had not expected to be unsure. Aldreth walked beside my horse rather than running ahead. He had not run ahead in 7 years. The wound from the Greyveld skirmish, the one that had never properly closed, the one that 3 of the finest healers in the Eastern Territories had looked at and quietly stepped back from, kept him slow, kept him close, kept his gray muzzle near the stirrup as though he needed to know where I was. I did not let myself watch him too carefully. A king cannot spend his days mourning what he cannot fix. We came over the last ridge into Valdenmere at gray dawn, and the hold surprised me. I had read the council reports. They described a fragmented pack, no central authority, livestock disputes at the southern boundary, the healer's post unfilled for 2 years, the great hall's roof in disrepair. What I found was a stone hold clean and well-ordered in the thin early light, the yard swept, the gate posts freshly lime-washed, the wolf runs along the eastern ridge showing signs of recent careful maintenance. The hold's fire was already burning. Someone had been up before me. The pack gathered at the gate when they heard the horses, a loose half-circle of men and women in plain working clothes, none of them in formal welcome dress, none of them performing anything. They simply stood. An older man stepped forward, introduced himself as the hold's elder steward, and said, with a plainness I found I respected, that they were glad I had come, and that they would answer whatever I needed to know. I dismounted. I said I would begin in the morning. Aldreth had not taken his eyes off the stone healing run at the far end of the yard. I thought he was scenting something old wolf instinct, a rabbit under the boards, something ordinary. I turned to follow the elder steward toward the hall, and I had gone perhaps 4 steps when Aldreth made a sound I had not heard from him in 7 years. Not a growl, not a whine, something quieter, the sound of a tension so absolute it had become physical. I stopped. There was a woman in the healing run. She was already at work. She had not come to the gate with the others, had not looked up when the horses arrived, and was not looking up now. She was kneeling beside a large gray male with a torn haunch, one of the pack's working wolves by the look of him, mud still on his legs from wherever he'd been, and her hands were moving along the wound with a steadiness that made the watching seem intrusive. The wolf was not fighting her. It was not sedated. It was simply still, its breathing even, its head low and relaxed on the stone floor of the run, as though being handled was the most natural thing in the world. Aldreth took 3 steps toward the run and stopped. "Who is that?" I said, to no one in particular. The elder steward had paused beside me. "That's Senna," he said. "She tends the wolves." "What is her rank?" He considered this. "She has no rank, my lord. She came to the hold 4 years ago. She asked if she could use the healing run. We said yes." I looked at him. 4 years, no rank, and she's been tending the pack's wolves. "Every one of them. She doesn't charge. She doesn't ask for anything. She just works." He paused. "The wolves find her. We stopped trying to understand it." I looked back at Aldreth. My wolf was standing at the entrance of the healing run with his head down and his tail, very slightly, very carefully, as though he did not quite trust the movement beginning to move. I cannot explain what happened to me in that moment. I am a man of practical understanding. I have governed a territory of 37 pack holds for 11 years. I have seen fated bonds ignite before. I know the theory. I know that the bond does not always strike like lightning, that sometimes it arrives as something quieter, more incremental, a recognition that builds before the mark ever appears. I know this intellectually. Standing in a cold yard in Valdenmere at gray dawn, watching my 7-year sick wolf shift his weight toward a woman who had not yet acknowledged I existed, I felt something I had no category for. It was not a pull. It was not a warmth in my chest, not the thing the old songs describe. It was closer to a correction. As though something that had been slightly wrong, tilted, off-drew, something I had grown so accustomed to that I had stopped registering it as wrong, had suddenly and silently been set right. I picked up my saddlebags and went to find my room. I gave myself until noon before I admitted I was watching her. I had a legitimate reason to be in the yard. I had the dissolution order to think about, and the yard was where I thought best, walking the boundary of what I was meant to be assessing, making notes in the small leather book I always carried. I walked the yard for 3 hours. I looked at the gate posts and the hall roof and the water situation at the north end of the Wolf Runs. I made notes on all of it. She was in the healing run the entire time. She worked without pause, without hurry, and without assistance. The hold had no other healer. The council reports had been right about that, but what the reports had not captured was that this had apparently not been a crisis, because she had been doing it alone for 4 years, and the pack's wolves were, by any visible measure, in better condition than the wolves of most holds I visited. I watched a young female with a bad leg come in stiff and leave 40 minutes later walking clean. I watched a male who had clearly been in a territorial dispute, ear torn, ribs showing a bruise, leave calmer than he had arrived. She did not rush any of them. She moved at the pace the wolf needed. Aldreth spent the morning at the entrance to the run. He would not go in, he would not leave. He lay down in the doorway with his gray head on his paws and watched her with the unblinking attention of a wolf who has decided something important is happening and intends to be present for it. I have known Aldreth for 18 years. I have never seen him do this before. I have seen him interested in things, alert to things, occasionally charmed by things a puppy liked, a particular stretch of pine forest running, the smell of a coming storm. I have never seen him still like this, patient like this. As though he understood that what was happening in that room was not something to be rushed. She noticed him at some point in the mid-morning. She did not make a production of it. She simply looked up, held his gaze for a moment, and then looked back at her work. That was all. Aldreth's tail moved once. I wrote nothing in my book for the next 20 minutes. The elder steward, whose name was Orm, showed me the hold's records over a midday meal. 3 years of careful ledgers, wolf health tallies, pasture rotations, water supply notes, a meticulous record of the boundary disputes at the southern edge and how each one had been resolved, almost always, I noticed, by negotiation rather than force, and almost always with outcomes the neighboring pack hold had agreed to. The hold had no alpha. It had no formal authority structure of any kind. What it had was this: a set of people who had, apparently, learned to manage their territory because someone had created enough stability and enough health among the pack's wolves for the rest of it to function. The council report said the healer's post was unfilled, I said. Orm looked at his hands. The council's healer left 2 winters ago. He paused. Senna was already here. She had been here for 2 years by then. The wolves were already going to her. We put it in the regional report that the post was unfilled because technically it is. She holds no seal. She has no certification from the Eastern Healers Guild. We did not know how to classify her. So you wrote her out of the report. We didn't mean, he stopped. Yes, I suppose we did. I looked at the ledgers. The wolf health tallies were in a different handwriting from the rest, smaller, more precise, with a notation system I didn't recognize but which, once I spent a few minutes with it, was clearly logical and comprehensive. Every wolf in the pack accounted for, every treatment recorded, every outcome noted. 4 years of records, not a single wolf death from a treatable injury. She keeps these, I said. Every morning. I set the ledger down. Outside the hall window, I could see the eastern ridge in the afternoon light, the pine shadows long across the wolf runs, and Aldrath, who had finally left the doorway of the healing run, moving slowly along the edge of the eastern trail. Moving, I noticed, in the direction Senna had gone 20 minutes earlier, when she had finished for the day and walked up toward the ridge with a worn leather satchel over one shoulder, and no apparent awareness that my great wolf was following her. She had not called him, she had not looked back, she had simply walked and he had followed. I sat with the ledger in my hands for a long time after that. The dissolution order was still in my saddlebag. I told myself I needed more information before I acted. I told myself the council had sent me to assess, and a thorough assessment took time. I told myself Aldrath needed the rest. The ride from the Greyveld passes had been hard on him, and one more day would not hurt anything. I told myself whatever I needed to tell myself. The truth was simpler and harder. I was watching my wolf come back to life, and I could not bring myself to cut it short. He was not healed. I want to be precise about this because I am a man who prefers precision. The wound from the Greyveld skirmish was still there, an old, deep thing, something that had not knitted properly, that had troubled him through 3 hot summers and 4 cold winters, and that the healers I had consulted had not been able to touch. He was still gray-muzzled. He was still slow. But on the second evening in Valdenmere, when he came back from his walk along the eastern ridge, there was something different in the way he held himself, less guarded, less careful. As though the constant low expenditure of effort that went into managing the wound had, for a few hours, been lifted. I found her sitting on the flat stone step at the top of the eastern trail at dusk. I had not gone looking for her. I had gone walking because I could not sleep, and the eastern trail was simply the direction I had walked in. She was sitting with her satchel beside her and her hands loose in her lap, watching the light go off the pines, and she did not startle when I came up behind her. She turned her head slightly, registered me, and then turned back to the pines. "You can sit," she said. "There's room." I sat on the far end of the flat stone, with a careful distance between us, and watched the pines go dark. "You were following your wolf," she said after a time. It was not a question. "He came this way." "He comes this way every evening now," she paused, "since you arrived. He doesn't usually follow people." "I know." She turned to look at me for the first time directly, and I felt the thing in my wrists that I had been trying not to think about, a warmth, a low, steady warmth, like an ember that had been banked a long time and was beginning to remember what it was built for. "He's been sick a long time." 7 years. "Yes," she said it simply, without pity, which I was grateful for. "The wound is old. It has layers, things put on top of it that were trying to help and didn't." She looked back at the pines. "It takes time to talk a wound like that into letting go." "Can you?" I stopped. "I don't know," she said, which was more honest than I had expected. "I've never worked on one this old, but he came to the doorway this morning and he let me look, and that's more than he's done for anyone in a long time, I think." "He hasn't." "Then we see." She picked up her satchel and stood. "Don't dissolve the pack, my lord," she said, without particular drama, looking at the last of the light on the ridge. "What they've built here is real. It just doesn't have the right shape for a council report." She walked back down the trail in the dusk, and I sat on the flat stone for a long time after she was gone. My wrists were warm, not uncomfortably so. Just present, a steadiness, a knowledge, as though something had looked at the current arrangement of my life and quietly begun the work of correcting it. On the 3rd morning, Aldrath collapsed. I was in the yard when it happened, early, the sun not yet fully over the ridge, frost still on the flat stones. He had been walking with me, as he did every morning, and then he was not walking. He went down without a sound, which was worse than if he had cried out. He simply folded, his great gray body settling onto the frozen yard with a completeness that meant he could not get up again. I was beside him in a moment. I put my hand on his side and felt the labored breath, the old wound hot under his fur in a way it had not been yesterday. 7 years, and it had chosen now to worsen, or perhaps it had been worsening slowly, and this was only the day it became visible. I do not know. I am not a healer. I looked up. Senna was already crossing the yard. She had not been called. I had not sent anyone. She had simply come out of the healing run where she had apparently already been at work, her satchel over her shoulder and her face carrying that expression I was coming to recognize. Not urgency, not alarm, but a focused attention, a settling into the work, the way a person looks when they know exactly what they are doing and are simply beginning to do it. She knelt beside Aldreth. She did not speak to me. She did not explain what she was going to do. She simply placed her hands on his side, one flat against his ribs, one near the old wound at his flank, and she was still. I have no language for what happened next that will not sound like the overwrought verse of a young poet trying to describe something real. I will try to be plain. The warmth that had been in my wrist since the first morning, the quiet, low ember of it flared. Not painfully, not dramatically. It simply became undeniable in the way that certain things become undeniable. The way you cannot unsee a shape once you have seen it, cannot unhear a word once you have understood it. I looked at my wrists. The bond mark was there. I had heard it described as golden white for an alpha, like a coal that had been breathed to life, like the first bar of winter sunlight through a stone window. It was exactly that. It was on both wrists simultaneously, appearing not as something new but as something revealed, as though it had always been waiting under the skin and had only now been given permission to show itself. And on her wrists I looked, because I had to, a warm amber copper, steady and true, like firelight in still air. She was looking at her wrists too. She looked for a long moment. Then she looked at Aldreth, who was breathing easier already under her hands, whose sides were moving with a steadiness he had not shown in years, whose gray muzzle was resting against her knee with the total trust of an animal who has finally found the hands it needed. Then she looked at me. "I see," she said very quietly. "I didn't plan," I began. "I know you didn't." Her voice was steady. She was not frightened, which steadied me. Neither did I. "His wound is going to take time, but it's moving now. It knows it's allowed to." She said it without mysticism, as a plain fact, the way she said everything. "I'll need to work on him every day for a while, weeks probably." Something in my chest unknotted at that. It was not strategic. I was not calculating how long she would need to stay. It was simpler than that. It was the realization that she would be here for weeks, and that this felt, inexplicably, like being told a weight I had not known I was carrying had been lifted. I was aware that the yard was not empty. I had been aware of this since the moment the bond mark appeared. The elder steward was at the hall door. 2 of the pack's working wolves had drifted to the edge of the run fence. 3 of the pack's women had appeared at the far end of the yard, drawn by the sight of the Alpha King's great wolf collapsing, staying at a respectful distance but very much present. The pack, in other words, was watching. I did not stand. I was still on one knee beside Aldreth. I had gone down without thinking about it, automatically, the way you go down when something you love has fallen, and I stayed there. I looked at Senna, who was still kneeling on the other side of my wolf, her amber copper mark visible in the morning light, her hand still warm against Aldreth's side. "Will you stay?" I said. "Not I need you to stay, not you are bound to stay." Those would have been easy sentences, they would have been wrong. "At Valdenmere," she said. "With me." I said it plainly because I had learned that she responded to plainness. I am not asking as an Alpha King. I understand that the bond has appeared and that you did not choose it in the way one would choose a road. I am asking, will you stay? With your wolf runs and your healing satchel and whatever you need. I am asking if you are willing. She looked at me across Aldreth's great gray body. I have been here 4 years, she said slowly. I have never thought of going anywhere else. That is not quite the same thing as saying yes to me. A small shift at the corner of her mouth. No, she agreed, it isn't. She looked down at Aldreth, then back up at me. Yes, she said, I'll stay. I did not file the dissolution order. I sent it back to the council with a note that was the longest formal document I had written in years, because it required precision. What the hold had built was not absent of authority, only structured differently from what the council's categories allowed for. The Wolf Health records, 4 years of them, comprehensive and exact, went with the letter. The ledgers went with the letter. A brief account of what the territory had accomplished without formal leadership went with the letter. I wrote it in the spare language I prefer for things that matter, and I said plainly that Valdenmere was not a pack in dissolution, but a pack in need of recognition. The council took 3 weeks to respond. In those 3 weeks, Senna worked on Aldreth every morning in the stone healing run, and every morning I sat outside the door because Aldreth seemed to want me there, and because I had discovered that watching her work was the most useful thing I had done in years. Not useful in any practical sense. I accomplished nothing sitting outside that door. But there is a kind of usefulness that is not about tasks, and it took me a long time to learn to recognize it, and I was learning it now. The old wound was shifting. She had said it would take time, and she was right, but I could see it, in the way Aldreth moved after each session, more freely than before, the stiffness coming back more slowly each time, the heat at his flank subsiding. She worked with her hands and with something she would not name, which I eventually stopped asking her to name because the name mattered less than the result. And the result was that my wolf of 18 years was beginning to remember what it felt like to run. We talked, on the evenings when she sat on the flat stone at the top of the eastern trail, and I came up behind her, no longer pretending I had not walked this way on purpose. She talked about the pack, about Orm's steadiness, about the southern boundary negotiations, about the woman who kept the water records and the young man who managed the livestock rotation with a precision that impressed her. She talked about each wolf she was treating with the careful attention of someone for whom each individual thing in her care was genuinely particular, genuinely itself, not interchangeable with any other. She did not talk much about herself. I learned to ask sideways. I learned that she had grown up in a pack that had not treated her gift with particular care, not cruelty, simply the ordinary inattention that greets things that don't fit existing categories. She had left at 23. She had been moving for 3 years before she came to Valdenmere, and when she arrived she had simply found the healing run empty and the wolves in need, and she had stayed, and nobody had given her a title or a seal, and she had not asked for one. You held this hold together, I said one evening. She shook her head. Orm held it together, the pack held it together. The wolves were healthy. Without healthy wolves none of the rest works. The boundary negotiations, the pasture rotations, all of it depends on a functioning wolf pack, and the wolf pack was functioning because of you. She looked at me with that direct gaze that I was still learning not to look away from. The council didn't know I existed. I know. The report that came to you said the healer's post was unfilled. I know. You came here to dissolve a pack that was whole. I held her gaze. Yes, and I was wrong to almost do it, and I am glad I didn't. I paused. I am glad of a great many things about coming here. The amber copper marks on her wrists caught the last of the evening light. She looked down at them with the expression she had worn since the morning they appeared, not distress, not confusion, simply the attentive regard she gave everything. This is a real thing, I am looking at it plainly, I will learn what it needs. I'm not very good at being known, she said. I'm better at knowing others. I've noticed. You'll have to be patient. I have been patient with Aldreth for 7 years. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh but lived in the same neighborhood. That's not the same kind of patience. No, I said, But I think I have that kind too if you want to find out. She looked at the pines for a long time. Then she said, "All right," with the same simplicity she brought to everything, and I understood that for her those two words were not small. The council's response came on a gray morning 3 weeks after I had sent my letter. It recognized Valdenmere as a functioning pack territory. It authorized the formal establishment of a healer's post, uncertified by the guild, the letter noted, somewhat stiffly, but the council was prepared to consider an exemption given the evidence provided, and it acknowledged the territory's wolf health records as sufficient documentation of stability. The dissolution order was formally rescinded. Orm read it twice, which was more than he usually needed for anything. "You did this," he said to me. "Senna's records did it," I said. "I only sent them." She never sent them herself. She wouldn't have thought to. I had come to understand this about her, not that she lacked the intelligence to advocate for herself, but that the work was the point, not the recognition of the work, and so she did the work and left the recognition to whoever noticed. I was the one who had noticed. I intended to keep noticing. The pack gathered that evening at the ridgetop, where the great flat stone served as a natural speaking place, the pine shadows long in the late light. It was not a ceremony. No one had called it that. There was no formal arrangement, no herald. The pack had simply gathered the way packs gather when something real has happened, drawn to the sight of it by the shared understanding that bearing witness mattered. Senna stood at the edge of the gathering and looked like she would have preferred not to be noticed. Aldrath went to her. He crossed the flat stone with a steadiness that was not yet the full run he had once had, but that was so much more than the labored plod of 3 weeks ago that the people watching made a sound, not applause, something quieter, the sound of recognition. He went to her and he put his great gray head against her hip, and she put her hand on his head without thinking about it, and they stood like that while the last of the light left the pines. I walked over and stood beside her. "You don't like this," I said quietly. "I don't need it," she said, which was a different thing, but she did not move away. "The pack needs to see it," I said. "They built this hold with you in it, and they never formally acknowledged that. Let them acknowledge it now." She looked at the gathered pack, Orm with his steady hands, the woman who kept the water records, the young man who managed the livestock with such care, the wolves drifting to the edges of the group, the whole of what had been quietly built here over 4 years. "All right," she said, and she lifted her head, and that was enough. That was the thing the pack needed to see, the simple dignity of her, the amber copper marks visible on her wrists where the evening light caught them. I heard the sound that moved through the pack. Not surprise. I think they had begun to understand over 3 weeks what the marks meant, had begun to piece together what they were watching. But something like relief, like something they had wanted to name for 4 years, had finally been given a name. In the weeks that followed, I learned that Senna's idea of settling in with a person was not entirely unlike her idea of settling in with a wolf. She did not rush it. She was not demonstrative in the way I might have expected, the full warmth of the bond visible in everything she did, but worn plainly, without theater, as simply another fact of her life that she had accepted and was learning alongside. She did not change the way she worked. She did not give up the flat stone at the top of the Eastern Trail, and I did not ask her to. I simply came and sat beside her, closer than before, and she allowed it and sometimes leaned against my arm when the evening went cold. And that was what it was, the bond finding its shape through the ordinary choices of an ordinary life, which is, I have come to believe, the only way the bond ever actually settles. Aldrath ran for the first time in 7 years on a morning in late autumn, when the frost was hard on the eastern ridge and the pines held the last of the darkness. He ran east along the wolf runs, and then he ran back, and then he ran east again, and I stood at the edge of the stone yard and watched him with a feeling I do not have an adequate word for. Something that was gratitude and grief and relief, all woven together, grief for the 7 years of it, gratitude that those years had an end, relief so complete it left me needing to stand still for a moment before I could move again. Senna came and stood beside me. She had seen it too, had come from the healing run when she heard the change in his movement, and now she stood at my shoulder, watching Aldreth run himself out along the ridgetop in the early frost. "There he is," she said. 3 words, but she said them the way she said everything, with her full attention, with the weight of someone who understood exactly what they were looking at. She had given him this. She had given it to him with her hands and with whatever she carried in them, and with a patience that matched his need exactly, and she had never made it about herself. I put my arm around her shoulders, and she let me, and we stood there and watched Aldreth run. This is what I remember when I think about Valdenmere. Not the dissolution order I almost filed, not the council letter, not the formal recognition or the gathered pack on the ridgetop stone or any of the things that found their way into records and official accounts. I remember the gray dawn when I walked into a yard and found a woman already at work, not looking up, not performing her worth, simply doing what needed to be done. And beside me, my great wolf of 18 years lifting his head for the first time in longer than I could count. I remember the flat stone at the top of the eastern trail, and the last light going off the pines, and her saying yes with the simplicity of someone who does not say things they do not mean. I remember Aldreth running. The council's letter sits in the Valdenmere holds records now, in Orm's careful ledgers filed under territory, recognized. Senna's wolf health tallies sit beside it, and they are in a different handwriting, smaller, more precise, with a notation system that is entirely her own, and they continue, one entry at a time, one wolf at a time, exactly as they always have. She still goes to the flat stone at dusk. I still follow her. We do not always talk. Sometimes we just watch the pines go dark, her shoulder against my arm, the amber copper marks warm in the last light, and that is enough, more than enough, is the truth of it, and I have stopped needing it to be anything other than what it is. This is the thing I did not know how to want, before I rode into Valdenmere with a dissolution order in my saddlebag and a wolf who could not run. This is the thing I did not know I was riding toward. I would not trade a single gray dawn of it.